let's get to this game in Wembley Stadium between the Rams and the Jaguars. Obviously, from a Jaguars perspective, it's like little brother going up against big brother. But something tells me that the Rams are far more worried about some other games.
Yeah, I mean, I guess. I think it'll be interesting. I know that it's going to be like a real family feeling type of environment because there's a lot of, as we know, we've talked about at length, a lot of connections, obviously, between the two organizations. But it's also like going on a road trip with your siblings or something. Like, that's kind of what this feels like to me. And I think it's cool because I think there's a lot of opportunity for, like, joint community work, joint just like experiences and sharing those types of things. Now the game, I guess, relative to like in division or in conference matchups, it's relatively low stakes, but it'll be competitive because Liam Cohen is going to want to beat Sean McVay, and Sean McVay is going to want to beat Liam Cohen. Les Snead is going to want to beat James Gladstone. James Gladstone is going to want to beat Les Snead. So that part of it, once the game begins, I think that'll get pretty fun.
I plan on peppering you with questions about some of those front office changes, probably for the rest of the time you join us on the Checkmate Coatings Hotline, Jourdan. But one more question about that matchup, because we just went through the Jaguars schedule weeks 1 through 17, or I guess through 18. My question for you is, and we did our official predictions too, and I have the Rams winning this game solely because I have predicted the demise and the aging of Matt Stafford each of the last 2 seasons, and I have been proven wrong each of the last 2. I'm never picking against him again. What say you as far as the state of this roster heading into 2025?
Yeah, Mia, it's rule number 1 of coming out to Los Angeles from anywhere else. You start to age in reverse, my friend.
Hey,
so,
I mean, that's why they got all the various cosmetic options for you to restore your health.
Yeah, I don't even want to know some of the stuff that exists out there for people to internally and externally age in reverse out here. But yeah, it's, this is a team that's made itself very clear, especially with how they went about just sort of patching little fixes in the draft, going after Sean McVay's favorite player and Terrence Ferguson, the tight end out of Oregon, but also patching these little areas of need and sort of going after specific players that they wanted, which I know you guys saw a lot of recently in Jacksonville as well. That part of the strategy. They needed to improve in smaller areas, depth in certain places. The fifth pass rusher, for example, the extra depth at inside linebacker, extra depth at running back. Those types of things are done by this team in the phase of their team building model where they believe they're in contention. And I think based on the last 2 seasons, they're right. They have this young roster that they've built over the last 2 draft classes, and then some core veterans that still can lift the floor of where the roster could be at its worst, and then can lift them to new ceilings at its best. And I think that the second you make the agreement with Matthew Stafford to return for at least 1 more season, you're immediately saying, okay, how can we push to get through that next phase of contention, past the playoffs, and into real Super Bowl contention? That's the message this team is sending right now.
Jourdan, about when did you figure out James Gladstone was going to become a general manager for a different organization?
Well, so my thing was that I thought he was going to walk into the sunset after Les retired. You heard some whispers at certain points that, the Rams were sort of had one eye on him because eventually, even though LA is LA, we all do age. And so eventually, I think Les has got a lot of years left in him in his career, but eventually, this happened. And so the Rams had one eye on him, of course, and we're sort of looking at him in that lens as well. But I remember when I was doing the Finding Rams series, it was about, I want to say like 3 months in, and I called Les just to go over some of the things that I was kind of getting from some of the meetings. And James was the point person for all of those meetings and all of those, not just running the scouting strategy, but also for me, like I was checking with him constantly on different details, different facts, questions, all of those things. Somehow he was very patient with me through that process because I knew nothing going into it. But I called Les and I was like, you better give that guy a raise because you're going to lose him. And Les, I think that was the first time Les ever actually got mad at me. You talk to him, you watch how he runs a meeting, you watch how he understands and communicates about football. you're in a room with him for all of 5 minutes, and you just know he's kind of just not just built for this type of job, but sort of born for it, I think.
Jourdan Rodrigue of the Athletic, as well as NFL Daily, joining us on the Checkmate Coatings hotline. It is time, my friend. It is time. We want the scoop, which I actually want to paint the picture as such, Jourdan. It was brought to my attention, and I brought this up on the air, I think it must have been last week or earlier this week, that while everyone, and we've had you on previously to discuss it, and everyone seemingly knows about the Finding Rams 2-part series that you did with James Gladstone for The Athletic, you actually had also penned another behind-the-scenes look at the Los Angeles Rams and their scouting operation back in 2020, which revealed that they were already planning this current structure, not to mention being virtual, skipping major, if you may, watershed, as many believe them to be, moments of the offseason program between the NFL Combine and the Senior Bowl in person. They were planning on that prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. I want to paint the picture and start there because obviously J.W. Jourdan, Brian Zanders, two front office personnel staffers who are not officially listed on the Jaguars website yet, but have been reported to be joining James Gladstone here in Jacksonville, had a major hand in designing that scouting department in LA.
Yeah, it's these guys that you're seeing, they were sort of the architects of what built the Rams into what the Rams are from a front office and scouting perspective. What I really like about how James is going about hiring these specific people is these are all very tenured, old school scouts who also have a hyper modern and hyper progressive way of thinking about how the process of scouting is done and how the process of team building is done. To go back to your initial point, yeah, they were changing into a lot of virtual work and a lot of this remote operation and not going to the Combine, not going to the All-Star games in totality, while still sending specific people to go do some specific fact-finding for the sake of efficiency, but also because they felt like it removed a lot of the noise from the process. So what a lot of people don't know on the outside is when you are a Les Snead or a Sean McVay and you go to, for example, the Senior Bowl, you're really not getting a ton of time to watch tape on prospects because the Senior Bowl is also a job fair. It's super valuable in finding prospects, and that and the Shrine Bowl are two of the best events you could possibly have tape from as a scout, as a front office person. They're fantastic. But it's also a job fair. So if you're Les Snead and you're sitting in the bleachers in Mobile, Alabama, you're actually not even turned to face the field. You're turned having a conversation with X personnel assistant from Y team, the college person from, wherever. And you're just constantly inundated with that type of networking conversation, which is really great. If you're ascending and you're a rising scout, you're a rising executive, all of that, that's awesome. And some people can multitask in that way, but they felt like they just weren't getting enough laser focused time on the prospects themselves, especially in the meetings. I mean, I sat in the interviews, in the nighttime interviews that they run during those tentpole events, those All-Star games. I was in the room, and you're not getting time with players. Some people, like Mike Tomlin, for example, is so gifted at immediately reaching in and getting to know who the player is, getting to understand exactly what they're about in a matter of seconds. He's so good at that. But that's not everybody's gift. And when you understand that your gift is breaking down tape and really understanding and building a full picture over time of a prospect, those events become less important for the sake of what they are really, and the tape becomes the all-important thing. That's how the Rams had thought about it, and that's what they wanted to try to experiment with when they rebuilt their processes in this way. And like I mentioned, the people that you mentioned and then some of the other names that are out there about joining Jacksonville, these are all the people who were the architects of that process way back in the day.
Jourdan, spoiler alert for people, you predicted the Rams to go 12-5. I'm guessing you have the Rams winning at Wembley Stadium against the Jaguars.
I didn't do a game-by-game prediction. I'm here for chaos. I would like to see. I don't really.
Oh, I think we lost her.
I think we may have lost Jordan there.
But yeah, she did predict the Rams to go 12-5. She said this is a better football team after nailing 2 consecutive draft classes and plugging around those ascending young starters with a top quarterback in Stafford, Matt Stafford, of course, that is, and small but important fixes elsewhere, such as along the defensive line. Her predicted NFC West finish: Rams first, 49ers second, Cardinals third, Seahawks fourth. So that is interesting. Yeah, I think we've jokingly said Rams East several times, but I don't think we really should be joking. The Jaguars are the Rams of the East, and that's why the personnel, like a guy like Jake Temme as well, has come over here from Los Angeles, because this is who the Jaguars want to model their entire system after as far as player procurement goes.
We wanted to dive into some of those names reported to be joining James Gladstone in the front office here in Jacksonville. Let's begin with the new Director of College Scouting, Brian Hill.
Yeah, B. Hill, as he is known was known around the Rams offices. So he's a really interesting case study in, I think, leadership and also how to better attune your leadership style to a range of styles and personalities and really understand the people who work for you, because he really is one of the people that taught Les, and in turn James as well, a big lesson in that, because B. Hill is really a nose to the grindstone scout. Like, he works. And he's also very quiet. And when he says something, it has a lot of weight to it and a lot of impact, because he only speaks up when it is important to do so. And I think that's one of the reasons why Les especially gravitated toward him, because often Les is put in as Les actually identifies as an introvert and is often in an extroverted role. And I think he really gravitated toward B. Hill's personality style and really trying to amplify that as a superpower, as they would call it, because when someone with those qualities and those traits speaks, they have a reason to do so, and they often have gone over these very intensive arguments and details before even presenting the information. And so I think this is great, because he's incredibly knowledgeable, incredibly connected across the country, because he's been in a variety of different scouting roles for the Rams, including, by the way, being the one who brought everyone's attention and pounded the table in meetings to the point where they did start paying more attention to this quiet, at the time, Pacific Northwest scout when they were scouting Cooper Kupp. And he really is somebody who I think Brad Holmes really championed as well, and somebody who I think is going to be great for this role because of his contacts, his connections, his knowledge of the entire college football landscape, but also because he is going to be the person in the meeting that when he says something, when he speaks, people will listen because they know it will have some weight to it.
Jordan, I feel like Jake Temme is already famous around these parts because he was featured in a Jaguars behind-the-scenes video when James Gladstone and Tony Baselli are walking along the field, and Jake was on speakerphone because he had to be with his wife, who was expecting and delivering a baby. And they asked, "Are we still in on Travis Hunter?" Of course, the video doesn't show us exactly, or doesn't tell us who they were talking about, but they said, "Are we still in?" And they were talking about Travis Hunter, and Jake says, "Hell yes." And so I feel like he's already, like I said, kind of a little bit of a legend here.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Jake, when you guys come to the Combine next year, you guys got to go to the Big Data Bowl and start asking some of the analytics people about Jake Temme. And it's like you're talking about, like, Superman, right? Like, he's that rare case of somebody who not only is, and I don't cover him anymore, so I can say this fairly without bias, like, he's brilliant. And I feel like it's so hard for people in that world to cross over into analytics, from analytics into football, and find a way to marry the two roles together. And I would call Jake sort of a pioneer of being able to do that in the instance where we're seeing it more and more. And 10 years ago, he's one of the first people to start doing that when working with the Rams. He built, with Ryan Garlish, who's still in Los Angeles, he built JARS into what it is today. And he's going to do the same thing with Blackwater, which is the Jaguars version of this data input and processing system that also has projection modeling ability, analytical ability, all of those types of things. I won't bore you with you guys with that today, but it is going to be really interesting because he walks with a foot in the football side and he walks with a foot in the analytical side and the math and the programming and the coding. And it's interesting because I think he's brought James way further into that world as well. And so I think he's going to be a resource and have a hand in every part of that building sort of quietly, and also kind of in a similar fashion to what James used to be for the Rams, where you would see him everywhere and hear about him being everywhere, but you'd never really see him in the front of anything. And I think it's only a matter of time before we start seeing Jake Temmie in the front of things.
Jourdan, let's wrap with this on the Checkmate Coatings hotline. Neil Stratton at Inside the League on X, who, of course, does a great job following all of the front office moves, noted that the Los Angeles Rams had 6 senior personnel executives last year, more than any other team, certainly with some of the elevated roles that have been passed out here in Jacksonville this week. Regis Eller now becoming a senior personnel executive. Josh Scobie, no, not the kicker, the other Josh Scobie, also now receiving that elevated title. We still don't know exactly what JW and Xander's titles will be. It's starting to take shape, is it not, what this organization and this front office will look like under James Gladstone, right down to him hiring another young up-and-comer, much like he once upon a time was, as his assistant in Charlie Stone. And so I'm curious for you, as we've now seen some things start to come to the forefront, where do you envision and how do you envision this operating? Will it be just like the Los Angeles Rams the last few seasons?
Yeah, well, I think as a writer, I would want to say it feels like fate. You know, it's very, you see, it looks very familiar, right? As a writer, I want to use that type of word. But if I'm James, the word I would use, or the assessment I would give would be, you know, not really sure if fate exists, but the importance of patterns exists, and the importance of following tried and true methodology and process. And that seems like what's happening here. I think that those senior executives, too, I wanted to take a minute, J.W. Jordan and Brian Xanders, 2 people I learned a lot from, actually, in Los Angeles. And those are 2 people who will be in James's ear. They'll be confidants. They'll be film study, you know, knuckleheads sitting in there. Probably need to keep them out of the same office because God only knows what would happen. But, you know, these are 2 very senior people who have experienced a lot of football in a lot of different styles of football and a lot of different styles of team building, and they're local to the area. So I think that probably was part of the reason why they could even be pried away from Les Snead in the first place. But there's a really interesting mix of like old school process and modern thinking. And I think that when you look at James and you see how young he looks, it's hard to sort of match that sentence and that description to him visually. But that's really how he is internally, and that's how he thinks. And so it's no surprise to me that he wants to build his staff in the same way, a mixture of extremely modern ideas and people he already knows he can collaborate with and works well with, but old school process, that old school like scout grinding the tape kind of personality. So all these guys would be more than happy. I mean, he's probably going to have them out and talking to the media because he wants to amplify his people. But these guys, all of them to a T, Michael Pierce, like all of these guys to a T would be more than happy sitting in a bunker for weeks on end just watching tape. And so I think it is it's going to be really interesting to see how they build out of this. And like I said, not necessarily following fate, but following this process and this pattern that really meant something to James when he was here in LA.
Hey, Mia here, and thanks so much for watching 1010XL Jaguars. For even more coverage of the Big Cats, be sure to subscribe to 1010XL Jaguars.